Hello everyone, thank you for joining us at Storytime here at the Curious George Cottage. Today Storytime starts with How Do You Get There? By Hans A. Ray. A little girl says goodbye to her mother and father. They are going away. But how will they get there? By bus. A little boy and his mother and father live in a lighthouse. If you want to go see them, how will you get there? By ship. The king is coming to his palace in India. The guards are waiting for him. How will he come? By elephant. 6 people have climbed a mountain. They are hot and tired, but they want to go on to the top of a still higher mountain. How will they get there? In a tram or gondola. It is very hot in the desert. A lady and gentleman want to go see the Sphinx and the pyramids. They look at them in the distance and wonder, how will they get there? By camel. There is a treasure lying at the bottom of the sea. Who will find it, and how will they get there? What do you think? By submarine. An Eskimo boy and his mother are waiting for father to come home so they can make some reindeer stew. How will father come? By dog sled. 2 cowboys on a ranch want to go across the plains to another ranch miles away. The boy and his dog know how they will get there. Do you? On some ponies. 2 men sit in a little boat near the shore of an island. The boat is too small to get across the sea, but one of the men must go. How will he do it? On an airplane. The road stretches ahead. How will this little man get to the end of it? He's going for a long, long walk. The end. Our second book today is Curious George Goes to the Beach, because it's almost time to go to the beach. Not quite yet. This is George. He lived with his friend, the man with the yellow hat. He was a good little monkey and always very curious. Today, the man had a surprise for George. He took George to the beach. They found a spot on the warm sand. Then another surprise. George saw his friend Betsy. "Look, Betsy," her grandmother said. "It's Curious George." But Betsy did not even smile. She had never been in the ocean before. She was scared. "I know you're a good swimmer," the man told her. "You'll be fine once you get in the water." Feeling better, Betsy walked toward the shore with her grandmother. George helped spread the beach blanket and set aside their lunch. He was looking forward to a picnic, but it was not yet time to eat. It was time to play. In no time, George was having fun. He learned a new game, he dug in the sand, and he made a new friend. Monkeys are good at making friends. Who do you make a friend with? A crab. When he took a break, George watched the lifeguard. The lifeguard sat in a special chair. Sometimes he blew a whistle. And sometimes he looked through binoculars. It looked like fun to be a lifeguard. George was curious. Could he be a lifeguard? Before long, the lifeguard took a break. Here was George's chance. Watching the crowd from up in the special chair, George felt just like a lifeguard. He looked through the binoculars. There was a lot to see at the beach. He saw seagulls flying high above, and he saw Betsy on the shore below. She still had not been in the water. Then the lifeguard saw George. "Hey," he yelled, "that's no place for a monkey." George thought it was a fine place for a monkey, but he didn't want to cause trouble, so he climbed down. Back at the beach blanket, George was hungry for a snack. No one would miss just one cracker, thought George. He took one out and put it on a napkin. It looked good. Now, if only he had some cheese. Uh-oh, what happened to his cracker? Well, he would just have to get a new one. George found another cracker, then turned around. But now his cheese was gone. Who could be taking his snacks? George was curious. He put down his cracker and waited. Now George saw who was taking his treats. It was a seagull, and he was still hungry. George took out another cracker, and the bird took it right out of his hand. What fun to feed a seagull. George saw more seagulls down at the water. Betsy was there too. George was curious. Could those seagulls be hungry? Indeed, they were hungry. Soon a whole flock had gathered. George could not feed them fast enough. Luckily, Betsy was glad to help. Out of the basket came more crackers, cookies, a cake, even the bread for sandwiches. Still, the birds were hungry. But when George reached for more snacks, the basket was gone. He and Betsy were having so much fun, they didn't notice the tide coming in. Oh, no. They didn't notice the picnic basket was floating out to sea. George felt bad. He hadn't meant to lose the basket. Could there be a way to catch it? George thought and thought. Then he remembered the lifeguard. George was no lifeguard, but to save the basket he knew just what to do. Quickly he found a float and carried it to the water. Jumping aboard, George began to paddle. He paddled out a little farther, and a little farther, and a little farther, until finally he reached the basket. Betsy cheered. Then, as George paddled back to the beach, Betsy swam out to meet him. Everyone was glad to see George safe on the shore. The lifeguard, who'd seen everything from his chair, said, "That was some rescue." George felt proud. The man with the yellow hat picked up the basket. He was curious. "George, is this our basket?" he asked. Poor George. After all that, the basket was empty. There would be no picnic on the beach, and it was all his fault. Then Betsy's grandmother said, "Won't you join us for lunch? We have plenty. And look, now we have a reason to celebrate, thanks to George." They did have a reason to celebrate. Betsy was in the water, and she wasn't scared anymore. She was having fun. After everyone joined Betsy and George for the swim, it was time to eat at last. There were sandwiches and chips, bananas, cookies, and watermelon. There was plenty for everyone, and there was even a little for guests. Who are their guests? The seagull. The end. And our last book today is Billy's Picture, also by Margaret and Hans Ray. But not Curious George. Billy's Picture. "I want to draw a picture," said Billy the bunny. So he took a pencil and began to draw. Just then, Penny the puppy happened to come along. "That's a pretty picture," said Penny, "but it needs a head. Please let me do it." And he took the pencil and drew a head with long floppy ears, just like his own. "There you are," he said. "That's the way it should be." "But," Billy began. Just then Greta the goose happened to come along. "That's a lovely picture," said Greta, "but it needs feet. Please let me do them." And she took the pencil and drew a pair of feet, just like her own. "There you are," she said. "That's the way it should be." "But what?" Billy began. Just then Paul the porcupine happened to come along. "That's a wonderful picture," said Paul, "but it needs quills. Please let me do them." Then he took the pencil and drew lots and lots of quills, just like his own. "There you are," he said. "That's the way it should be." "But Billy began. Just then Ronnie the rooster happened to come along. "That's a beautiful picture," said Ronnie, "but it needs a comb. Please let me do it." And he took the pencil and drew a comb, just like his own. "There you are," he said. "That's the way it should be." "But what I wanted," Billy began. Just then Oliver the owl happened to come along. "That's a great picture," said Oliver, "but it needs wings. Please let me do them." And then he took the pencil and drew a pair of wings, just like his own. "There you are," he said. "That's the way it should be. But what I want to," Billy began. Just then Maggie the mouse happened to come along. "That's a sweet picture," said Maggie, "but it needs a tail. Please let me do it." And she took the pencil and drew a tail, just like her own. "There you are," she said. "That's the way it should be." "But what I wanted to draw," Billy began. Just then Eric the elephant happened to come along. "That's a delightful picture," said Eric, "but it needs a trunk. Please let me do it." "Where can he put the trunk?" And he took the pencil and drew a trunk just like his own. "There you are," he said. "That's the way it should be." "But what I wanted to draw," Billy began once more, and this time nobody happened to come along. "What I wanted to draw isn't a pup, pea goose, or pork goo elephant, or whatever you call this silly picture. All I wanted to draw was a picture of myself." Here Billy began to cry for a moment, and nobody said anything. Then everybody started talking at the same time. "A picture of myself. That's just what I wanted to do," said Penny and Greta and Paul and Ronnie and Oliver and Eric. Billy stopped crying. "Why not do it then?" he said. And that's what they did. Eric drew an elephant, and Maggie drew a mouse. Paul drew a porcupine, and Greta drew a goose. Penny drew a puppy, and Oliver drew an owl. Ronnie drew a rooster, and can you guess what Billy drew? That's what he drew. A bunny rabbit named Billy. Thank you for listening to Story Time. Maybe if we get a chance, we'll go have a little adventure and story next.